Okay, in this video, we're going to go through wrong answers. And what I mean by that is, well, oftentimes you know an answer is not correct, but you're not sure why. You don't really have a format or schema in which to conceptualize why is a wrong answer wrong. So what I'm going to give you today is a way of describing wrong answers. And what's important here is if you know why an answer is wrong, if you can definitively say, hey, it's out of scope or it assumes too much, then you feel a lot more confident about choosing the right answer. And of course, sometimes you won't be able to choose the right answer off the bat, so it's great to be able to eliminate everything with confidence, so the last man standing, so to speak, is, of course, the answer. Now, this specific question we have, the author implies that the telescope Galileo has fashioned together. Notice implies, I'm going to go in a little bit more clearly, there we go. Implies means it's not directly stated. We have to infer a little bit. Okay, of course, there's a little bit. So let's go back to the passage and see what it says. Galileo stuck lenses onto either end of an organ pipe. Today's research telescopes, while considerably more elaborate, so basically Galileo's telescope is very basic. Today they're a little bit more fancy. They still perform the same fundamental task of collecting and focusing light. So he's implying then that Galileo's telescope here did the same function as today's telescopes, which is to collect and focus light. Okay, so you can kind of anticipate the answer there. So it implies that the telescope Galileo had fashioned together, well, let's start with A, was too crude to yield reliable information. Okay, it was definitely crude. Do we know if it was too crude to yield reliable information? And so you could perhaps convince yourself that, well, it must have been, it was the first telescope ever. But then you're thinking outside of the passage. Do not do that. It goes beyond what the passage is saying. So in the sense it's out of scope, and I could be funny and say, hey, look, out of telescope, but of course, bad wordplay. Or I could even say that, hey, this assumes too much. It assumes that just because it's the first, just because it was crude, that it wasn't able to yield reliable information. So either out of scope or assumes too much, but we know for sure that that is wrong. So B, allowed for the collecting and focusing of light. That's perfect. That was my anticipated answer. But let's say you're not sure. You're going to put a question mark there. Now let's look at C. Was unable to process electromagnetic radiation. Well, go back to the passage, and we're looking, of course, for electromagnetic radiation. Does it say anything about it? If it doesn't, then the answer is wrong because it's out of scope. But we'll see here in a second that it does. It says, it's all astronomers have to go on. Electromagnetic radiation from distant objects. So you can see that today's telescopes rely on electromagnetic radiation, and they're similar. They're more elaborate, but they're doing the same function as Galileo's. So Galileo's too relied on electromagnetic radiation. But if we look here at the answer, it says was unable to process. So you can see that this one word makes the whole thing wrong. And this is what I call the rotten fruit answer, meaning that everything's fine, everything sounds great, but there's one part of it that's wrong, that's rotten. And here it's rotten because it was able to, he implies that. So that's definitely wrong. So now we're down to D, which says required a technical background to use. Now, does it mention anything about a technical background in there? No. And so that's, to me, is a very clear, out of scope, wrong answer. So that's gone. E was the first such invention. Again, going back to the passage, does it say it was the first type of invention? And the answer is it doesn't actually say that. It makes it sound like that because it's contrasted to today's research telescopes, but it doesn't explicitly say that Galileo's telescope was the first. However, you may say, wait a second, I heard somewhere that Galileo was the first to invent it. So that's fine. But if it's not mentioned in the passage, it's wrong. So it may be true. It may be true in the real world. But either it doesn't answer the question or it's not in the passage. So you can see it's true, but doesn't answer the question, or simply it's out of scope because, hey, the passage doesn't mention it. So you'll see that sometimes the wrong answers are a combination of these. They don't always fit into each one of these succinctly, but this gives you a sense of how the test writers create wrong answers. And once you can identify them, as we've done above here, you can eliminate the ones that are clearly wrong. In this case, that allows us to have just answer choice B.